You're listening to ABA On Call. Hosted by myself, Rick Kubina, and Doug Kostewicz, this is your front row seat to the future of behavior analysis. Join us for fresh ideas, practical strategies, and bold conversations designed to inspire action. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to ABA On Call. Doug, as we record this episode, we are breaking free of winter. It's spring. The weather's changing. It just seems positive out there.
It's finally warm. That's all I know.
Yeah, and I love it.
And not rainy.
Yes. What a winter it's been. We're going to talk about something today that I'm going to go out on a limb here and bet that almost every single person has never heard of. And why do I say that? Because there are literally, as far as I know, like 3 sources on this topic. And this topic's called behavior dynamics.
Mm-hmm.
The first paper was written by Jack Marr. Maybe that was in the 80s or 90s. I forget when that one is. Then there was a chapter written by our advisor, John Cooper.
Mm-hmm.
And then I wrote a paper recently. And, 3 things that are out there. Probably no one's ever read that chapter. Very few people have ever accessed. And then, again, my paper is like, oh, what is this stuff? And behavior dynamics is something that should be more popular. But, we're a science, and a lot of these things don't necessarily bubble to the top. But I feel this is an issue we should let everyone become aware of, because it has incredible implications and it helps broaden our perspective as a science. I mean, you read about this, Doug. So what were some of your thoughts when you were encountering this?
Well, the big thing here, and I don't want to spoil the whole podcast, but when the majority of our work is done in, quote, real world settings, and we don't have the same level of control as a laboratory setting.
Yeah.
And looking at behavior through this lens allows individuals to, as you'll see, really make strong, informed decisions about the treatments for kids and adults that we serve. And I think that is one of the really awesome points to think about through this process of behavioral dynamics. And that's just because we're such a practitioner focused science.
Yeah, you're right on all counts. Well, let me just give a brief explanation for, we'll put in the show notes the links to my article, Jack Marr's article, and then we'll put also the chapter. Like, that's a book you'd have to buy it if you were interested in it, so that if any of you want to read up on this, you could. So by behavior dynamics, there was a conference many years ago, and that's where this article came about. So there have been people in our field that have been talking about this, but you mentioned physics. So physics considered either the king or queen of the sciences, depending on who you talk to. It's revered. It's looked at as a hard science. It's has all of these accolades, and it's because it's delivered the goods. Physics has done so much to help us understand the world. And for all of us, we understand behavior analysis. I understand the basics of physics from being a high school educated person, maybe had a class in college, which I can hardly remember, but I know physicists. So there's a lot of deep concepts I don't know, but that's okay, because understanding the basics helps us understand how this could be similar and help us understand our science a little better. So behavior dynamics draws in parallels to physics. For example, I'll give you two quick examples. So you're all probably familiar with force, or you've heard about force. And from a basic standpoint, we have this thing called motion. Motion doesn't happen by magic.
Nope.
You got to have a force that is going to propel that motion to make that thing happen. And this is studied so much in physics. Well, what do we have in behavior analysis? Like when we talk about, when we understand behavior, behavior doesn't change by magic. Behavior doesn't change because we will it, because we have free will. And we're like, oh, I'm going to go get a coffee. No, if you understand our science, you understand that consequences pull behavior. We have these relationships. Yes, we have our own individual biology. We have these histories of reinforcement. I mean, I'm speaking very simple now, but this is the parallel.
Right.
And I'll give you one other parallel. And this is something that you've all probably felt. Have you ever been in a car and you're the passenger or the driver and you slam on that accelerator pedal and you're like, whoa, you go back in your seat? That feeling of going faster, that rate of change of your velocity is what acceleration is. A lot of times when people think about this, like, oh, I'm going 60 miles an hour. No, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about putting a number on how you're accelerating. And it's the same thing when you're decelerating. If you slam on the brakes and you go forward in your car, the quicker you lose that, you slow down, so to speak, that's your deceleration. Something that we have, Doug, is acceleration. And it's the parallel is the rate of change of behavior. We're not talking about how fast you can, keyboard. We're talking about over time, if you're learning, is that going up or is that going down? So with this parallel, if we understand this, what Jack Moore and other people were drawing for is saying, look, if we go back in behavior analysis, Skinner in our basic science was focused more on behavior dynamics versus the steady state that we all understand now.
I think I'm expanding what you said. So understanding that consequences, so we start to do things, but you can start to do things with, like you said, we can do them faster over time. And then looking at what are those consequences that are providing? What's the schedule of reinforcement? What are we limited by our own physical nature to be able to accelerate? So these are these parallels that you're discussing between how we look at behavior and how we look at force equals mass times acceleration, understanding the propelling of things. So it's really enlightening to read this because it gives us another way than just here's something happening, then behavior changes. Because the world there are so many factors working on us, setting the stage for behavior, increasing the likelihood, then that changes over time. Once we get to a certain level, we may need different consequences to push that even further. So it is a nice add-on, not excluding the other things that we're talking about, but it's a nice add-on way to look at things to really propel, because we do, and Rick, you and I may be jumping ahead, getting in the next section, understanding that different rates of behavior allow you to interact with different aspects of the world and allow you to interact with different contingencies. And we sometimes need to get to those certain rates to actually do things. So we're really not just focused on making behavior happen. We want to look at different ways to accelerate behavior because we have limited time to get that behavior to some point. And in looking at this model, it's really a neat but effective way to take another glance at things.
Doug, behavior is a system that's constantly in motion. And we need to embrace that. And we need to understand that the way, and this is, again, you, me, everyone listening to this understands the steady state. This is, you pick up any of our textbooks, if you see the classic A, B, those are steady states. And we understand that can provide us evidence, but there's a whole lot of other ways. Like we can't restrict ourselves to just that.
Right. And I think that's the big point is this is not in any way a replacement. This is an added tool to your toolbox in the way to examine things because, let's be honest, some places you can't get a steady state.
Yeah.
And so how can we help individuals in that way? And there may be some other things that we can do that are still aligning towards various scientific examination rather than just trial and error.
Yeah. Well, Doug, you on that comment have brought us to our first secret word, which is fourth. Let's switch gears let's talk about something that we're all familiar with, which is precision teaching. Some of you might not be as familiar with it as we are. Doug and I have been doing this, since the 90s. I started earlier than you, since I'm 100 years older than you, and I started in the actual 80s. So
okay,
let's discuss precision teaching in behavior dynamics. So why don't you let us know, like, where a lot of times people will criticize precision teaching because precision teaching, if you read a lot of the literature, you're not going to see a lot of A-B steady states. But how can we look at precision teaching in this behavioral dynamic lens and say, you know what, we are producing reliable evidence? Where is this parallel that you could talk about?
So first, we have to go back to the hallmarks of precision teaching. One is a standard acceleration chart, right? Second is we're identifying very small behaviors, right? Their movement cycles as finite a source as possible so that we can then plot that data on a standard acceleration chart. What does that chart give us that other charts don't? Is when you have enough data, you can gather things like bounce, of course, level, but you can also get acceleration. And acceleration is behavior over time, right? That's the formula. So what this gives us is we have a standardized display. You have these measurably superior metrics. And when you start keeping track of all these behaviors across many individuals, what you start to see are patterns in the data. So you can start to see individuals perhaps that are accelerating under these similar conditions at a times two. Well, whatever that behavior is, something's happening to accelerate. Remember, it's not just driving at 60, like you said. This behavior is doubling each week. So it's going 4, 8, 16. It's doubling. And if those patterns start to repeat at a times two, even if the level is changing, we can start to say some things about the intervention, even if we don't have A, B, A, B. So the patterns within the data, because of the display, allow for some of these aspects of behavioral dynamics to come into play, and we get some reliable results. We'll liken it to the cumulative record, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Skinner came up with schedules of reinforcement, not through an ABAB.
No, he did not.
He looked at the patterns within the data, rise and run, right? Boom, right? We're going up. We see these, and he's making marks where the reinforcement's occurring. He starts to see, and we have our, like, what's the graph for VR schedules? What's the graph? So he came up with this not through experimental designs. He came up with it viewing these repeated patterns within the data. And that's what PT can give you when viewed through a behavior dynamic lens.
Yeah. I want to emphasize what you're saying here, and because it's so important. I have had, and maybe you've experienced this too, I've had graduate students that have come up to me and asked me, maybe they're trying to bounce some ideas off me. You know what? I really want to do this study on fluency and practice, but I just don't know how to make it work because it's going to be growing. Like, they're looking at, and what they're thinking is, oh, I need a steady state. I need it to be flat. or stable and not have any growth. And that's exactly the opposite of what Skinner did. We said earlier that when we understand behavior, it's a system that's constantly in motion. And if you set up an experiment, and Skinner did experiments, what you said was experimental design. And that's getting at, when we talk about single case experimental design, that refers to steady state logic.
Right.
But yet you can still do experiments. Like, no one's going to say, oh, Skinner didn't do experiments. Skinner's, work was rubbish. I don't believe that. No, he did it. All of his colleagues did it. And if you had something that was accelerating, because everyone saw the same effect, guess what they said? We have reliable information. And that's what we need to embrace as a field. We have to stop thinking that everything has to be steady state. We can only have functional relations if we have a steady state, because when we do that, we just cut off all the usefulness and possibilities of the kind of experiments that we could do.
Right. And we're not, again, I'm stressing here, that doesn't mean we don't still use experimental single case designs that involve steady state logic. That just means there are other ways to determine these effects. And as I mentioned in the first section, we have a lot of kids and clients, we can't get steady state. There's so many factors going on around them. We can't control these variables. Its behavior's not going to be flatline. So we've got to now find if it's accelerating at a times 1.1 without the intervention, all of a sudden it's accelerating at a times 3.0, and that repeats after everything. Well, guess what? We didn't have steady state. It was increasing, but we had this huge turn, right?
Yeah.
Or even if we start doing something and all of a sudden things are going through the roof for everybody we do, that is where, now, doing it in one person, that definitely is not, one person's data is not the same as what we're talking about here. This needs to be, these patterns need to be repeated over time. That is there's still ends of one, but they're repeating this pattern over time.
Just like what we talked about a long time ago on one of our previous podcasts, where we talked about Johnson and Pennypacker, and they talk about, would you rather have 1,000 N of ones or 1 N of 1,000? And the answer is always going to be 1,000 N ones, N of ones, because that's 1,000 replications versus you get a bunch of people together, you take the average, and again, we're talking about evidence and like very practical example. We're talking about fluency. Let's say that you take a child and you ask them, okay, read this in a minute. And then the next day you say, hey, read this in a minute. If you do that across 2 weeks, just by you asking them to go, they're going to get faster. It's not going to be, oh, every day it's going to be 0. And maybe it plateaus if you did it for a year or something like that and they didn't get anything else. But you do see, like you were saying, it could be a growth rate. But if you then go in and do something and then it really shoots up and you do that, you repeat that again and again, are we going to then argue that, oh, that intervention doesn't have any validity because you didn't have a steady state?
I mean, it's a hard argument. One, because if you look at our learning history going through undergrad to graduate school, and if you're fortunate enough or want to pursue even in the doctoral programs, you're going to be hit over and over again with the notion, here's a design, this is behavior analysis, these are the N of 1 things. It's either reversal, it's either a multiple baseline, it's a changing criterion, all based on steady state. That's fine. That's great evidence. There's more available to you. And if, we're going to get to the last section of what are some of the behavioral dynamic outcomes of precision teaching that, you find out a lot, and it can drive really socially significant gains for your clients.
And that's what this is all about. If our audience is by and far applied folks, and they're doing amazing work, and they're in all sorts of different, we've heard from several people. You name it. We have folks from across the spectrum that work in centers, that work at homes, that, and just work all over the place. And understanding and having another way to show that you're producing reliable and valid information. Again, if you want to do steady state, fine, but this is what we have in precision teaching, and we have so many different studies, and we can show that there are things that we do that reach the threshold of moving beyond saying, oh, I think this is going to happen, to this is reliable evidence.
Right. I think that brings us to our second word. And our second secret word is acceleration.
Okay. Well, we have one more segment with this, and let's talk about, well, how can we use behavior dynamics to help us guide decisions? Some of you are not familiar with precision teaching and probably heard about it before. Those weirdos over there that are using that crazy blue chart.
If they listen to us, they've heard of it. So
that's true. Okay, who are we kidding? We talk about it a lot. So
right.
If you've been listening to us, you know what it is.
Right.
What are ways that these behavior dynamics that we're talking about, if people were using them, how could they use it in their practice to guide decisions, to understand what the data are telling them?
Well, one of the things that I think we could argue has emanated from behavior dynamics, and I may have not said that, is the outcomes of when you reach fluent levels of behavior, right? So what we're talking about here, and I'm going to give you the basic acronym, which is REAPS, but there's other things that have been added to this over time through discovery, right? We've seen patterns of behavior. When we get behaviors to certain performance standards, we get cool behavioral effects, such as retention, endurance, and application. And these things have come from, so where does this come into play? Well, when you find those fluent levels, which are usually a band, it's an aim, right? We're trying to get that performance standard. And you take those, if we can get to that point faster than with other interventions, you're going to get those outcomes faster. What were you doing? You didn't need steady state. You're taking the behavior from where it is. How am I going to accelerate it using acceleration, accelerate it to get to those aims, to get those outcomes? So basic things, you can look at decoding in context, reading fluency, boom, you hit certain aims, you're going to get certain outcomes. You don't need a child who's not reading at all to start to implement some type of intervention, plot that data, words correct and incorrect per minute, boom, plot that data daily. And once they hit that performance standard, you're going to get the effects that others have seen across behaviors.
Yeah, that's well said. I was thinking also that we tend to talk a lot about academics because those are things that we deal with, but we also deal with social behaviors. And oftentimes people call behavior analysts and like, hey, I got this kid that's doing X. I want you to make it go away. Or I want you, hey, we have a student who's not doing this. Can you make more of that happen? In everything that we talked about, it's the same thing. If we were dealing with the social behavior, and let's say we had some children and they were very shy and they weren't making initiations, you could look at, implementing an intervention. And this is what, going back to what we were saying earlier, this is what Skinner did. When Skinner would oftentimes start off an experiment and there's some type of schedule of reinforcement that, okay, let's see what this, so you could just start the experiment with that schedule of reinforcement and see how does the animal respond in that experimental chamber. And it's the same thing here. If you had a intervention and you said, you know what, if you were going the steady state route, you have to a wait and see attitude. Like, okay, well, let's wait for 5 days. Let's wait for 10 days or however many days you have a baseline. And then we can start. you can go right in and start the intervention and look at what kind of accelerative effect does that have. And if you did that across 10 children, and let's say like we can measure that. Let's say it's times 2. And you did that and the lowest one of those 10 maybe was a times 1.5, but you had some that were like times 3. You could argue based on just this acceleration that we can measure, that you have reliable information. There's more that you could look at. We could talk about variability or bounce, and there are other ways to understand the dynamics of this behavior change. But just on that one alone, you could argue that, okay, we have information here. This is something I can do in the future to help children make more initiations.
Let me go even one step further. So what happens? You're trying this thing out, you're charting it, but for every kid, it takes about 6 to 8 days for it to going, and then it starts to accelerate. You see behaviors, maybe there's a lag time for things, and a steady state would tell you, nope, it didn't work. But maybe it needs 6 days to get going. Maybe you have 2 interventions you try. One takes 6 days to get going, one takes 10. Well, now you know which one's a little bit more efficient than the other one because you're attending to the lag that it takes for that intervention to go. So you're letting the data picture help make the decisions, but not only that, you're letting that picture guide what you do with the next student as well, because then you're comparing picture to picture. Now, I'll hit this here, Rick, and you got to have a consistent picture that you're using. You can't just make up graphs and change the axes. But of course, we've had conversations about this. Not a fan of non-standard charts when you can't have non-standard charts and do this level of analysis. You have to have a standard graph, ideally a standard acceleration chart because of the logarithmic nature, but you need standard pictures so that the patterns are meaningful.
Yeah, that is a solid point. I mean, Skinner and everyone in his era had standards. They had the cumulative recorder, and that those records that were produced were standard. We just don't have that anymore, and it makes it challenging to understand where are these dynamics. Of course, we advocate for the standard ratio scaled chart, but even if you're using a standard linear scale, at least it would be standard, and you'd be able to detect more meaningful patterns because that behavior is going to be changing. And if you're right, if the scaling's off, it's going to be challenging to see it.
It's not challenging. You can't.
The
visual analysis allows, if you're using visual analysis, the beauty of standard chart, you're going to get numbers. And so a times 2 is a times 2. I don't even need to see what it looks like. If it's plugged in and I'm getting a times 2, a doubling every week, well, I understand that. Then I'll understand more. There may be something to do with bounce, right? Which is the variability envelope around that acceleration line. But again, that's patterns, right? So you could find out for some kids, you're getting a lot more stimulus control. You're getting lower bounce, but you're getting the same acceleration. Why am I getting the same acceleration, but with greater bounce for this kid? Oh, now I can look to the environment. So you're doing visual analysis, you're doing mathematical analysis, but it's prompting questions in the environment about your intervention. And because you're doing this every day, you can make changes as you need.
Yeah. You know what? We're starting to head towards time, but I did want to bring something up that you just inspired me to think about. We're talking about doing this in the classroom, but how does this apply to everybody out there that's doing functional analyses and functional assessments? I mean, what could they learn if they were looking at just the variability or the bounce? What does that tell you? There's so much we could harness in understanding these dynamical systems, which is behavior. A behavior, if you're a living organism, you're animated, you're always moving. You use the term movement cycles. That is a precision teaching term, that behavior is movement. And a cycle is simply something that begins and ends. And that's how we count behavior. We're counting these behaviors over time. And we're understanding that based on these environmental phenomena, however that's arranged, this is how the organism is responding. And if someone is having a challenging behavior and they're trying to understand, why is this person having this? All of that information is just left on the table. If you don't put it on the chart and you don't look at the standard way of understanding these change patterns. Skinner and his other group had it when they looked at the scallops in the behavior. We don't have that because, our field moved away from that standard view, and arguably has moved away just because we're no longer looking at these behavior dynamics that Skinner and colleagues did. We just don't have any of that anymore.
Yep. And before we end, I wanted to thank one of my doc students for the impetus for this discussion, because she asked me the question, functional relation versus experimental effect. And I sat there, we talked about it, and then Rick and I got to talking, and I said, you know what? There's something more than that. And then Rick goes, you know what? Let's talk about behavior dynamics, because that's the same effect. You can show effects, and it's not based on design. It's based on observation and understanding that display. And I just wanted to thank her.
Yeah. Well, then that will bring us to our third secret word, which is mass. Doug, fabulous conversation.
Yep.
Really enjoyed your comments here.
Yeah. And you know what? I've heard from you that we're getting lots of comments from others about the podcast. So thank you for those comments. I didn't know if you wanted to say something else about that.
Oh, yeah. If you could share this with other people, give us a like and subscribe wherever you view podcasts. We know we're having an effect because the last podcast, if you all recall, we talked about Sigmund Freud. And I got to tell you, boy, some people did not like our take on debunking Freud. And that was good in the sense that we do this because, yes, we love our field, but we want to spark a conversation and we want people to think about these topics. And interestingly enough, we received a lot of comments that came from that. So we appreciate you all listening. We appreciate when you give us this feedback. And we are going to continue talking about behavior analysis and just how, if you had that worldview, how it shapes your understanding of many different events, phenomena, and behavior that's out there. Yeah. So with that, thank you all for joining us on ABA On Call, and we look forward to the next episode. Thank you for being part of ABA On Call. Want to grab your CEU? Just click the link in the instructions, complete the quiz, enter the secret words, and pay the fee to download your certificate. You've done the work, claim the credit. Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you in the next episode.